Welcome. I'm Mark Davenport. I'm here with
Heidi Hörnlein.
Right. And we have created the Wisdom Factory as a forum for people who have experience, knowledge, and wisdom to share with the world. And sometimes we even share our wisdom. Yeah. Okay. But that's another show. Yeah. We've been doing this for more than a year now with weekly live broadcasts. We've had several seasons, a couple called Wisdom Technologies and another Conversations That Matter. And we have occasional community gatherings too. And we're interested in raising consciousness and spreading the wisdom of integral theory and show how it's used in practice. We are coaches and counselors, and we're presently working on relationships for the second half of life.
Having us as an example.
Yeah, we're definitely second halfers, yes. We're now broadcasting a 4-month series about wisdom in relationships, and we call it Stop the Relationship. Grow your relations. We have 14 experts operating within an integral worldview. And today, one of those experts is here. He'll be talking about how to nurture your relationship with yourself while changing the world. And with that title, we must be talking about Alex Howard. Hello, Alex.
Why would that title? That's very good.
I don't know. I just opened my mouth and words came out. You know.
It's quite.
You're lucky.
I'm looking forward to getting home tonight and saying to my wife, "I did an interview on relationships, and apparently I'm an expert."
Yeah. Yes, that's true. We said so. You can quote us. Yes. Right. Well, anyway.
At this point, do you want to present him, or do we want him to present himself?
Well,
or do you want to listen to what we are saying about you now?
Ask him.
Okay. You present him.
Okay.
So he has to say something else to his wife.
All right. So this is what is the truth. Yes. Yeah. Alex is a social entrepreneur, a psychotherapist, and an author. As a student of the Diamond Approach for the last 14 years or so, and a successful entrepreneur, he has a fascinating journey of integrating inner awakening with daily life, inner and outer together. He's a founder and CEO of the Optimum Health Clinic, a major UK charity with patients in over 35 countries. His leadership has seen groundbreaking research published in the British medical journal Open, and has seen a recent campaign launched in the House of Lords. Interesting. Alex has written several books and various academic papers. He is also the founder and host of Conscious2, where we met him, actually. He's deeply passionate about the principles of Conscious2 and is truly excited to dive deeper into various subjects through the dialogues, coursework, and interviews, etc. in Conscious2.
And we, by the way, too. Here in our show, The Wisdom Factory, and also in his TV, Conscious2, we are really excited what he's offering. But we will talk about that probably later.
Yes.
So now to you, Alex. Well, we are talking about fascinating journey of integrating inner awakening with daily life. How did that come about?
I should say, firstly, it's quite funny being on this side of the equation. I'm used to being the one asking the questions. So basically, my spiritual path, and that's not a great term for it because I think it means so many different things to different people, but my own interest, my own, I guess, awakening as a spiritual enthusiast, let's say, was suffering from chronic fatigue, or ME, sometimes more popularly known as fibromyalgia, which is a kind of similar kind of condition, when I was in my mid-teens. And basically, I woke up one morning, and if there was like a plug of energy going into the body, it was like that had been pulled out. And initially, I just thought I had, a kind of viral kind of thing, and the doctor thought that. But that went on in the end for 7 years. And 2 years into that, I reached a point of pretty serious desperation. Just getting through the day in terms of energy was a major, major struggle. And I had all kinds of muscle pains and dizziness and headaches, and a whole host of really, really unpleasant symptoms. And after 2 years of this, and being at times housebound, at times even virtually bedbound, I became pretty seriously desperate. And I wasn't depressed in the classical sense, although I was pretty depressed about my prospects of my life at this point. And it really reached one of those kind of crossroads where I just didn't feel my life could continue going down the path that it was. So fundamentally, something significant had to change. And I was helped to realize that fundamentally, if I wanted my life to be different, I was going to have to be the one to do something about it. And at that time, I had all kinds of reasons why that was impossible. I was 18 years old, and I was suffering from a severe chronic illness that the world's leading experts at that time would say was incurable. But I think there's a certain benefit of being young and somewhat naive and somewhat cocky, because, of course, you think you can conquer the world. And I was infused with a little bit of self-belief, and basically spent the next 5 years of my life on a fairly obsessive path of trying to understand everything I could about health, healing. I developed a love affair with psychology and meditation, and read hundreds and hundreds of books, meditated, practiced yoga, ended up going to university and spending my student loan pretty much on supplements and books and yoga classes. It wasn't quite the rock and roll university lifestyle that many people have, but it was a really, in many ways, a very magical time. And so I, through this kind of journey and trying many different things, in the end, I found my way to recovery. And there wasn't one magic answer, but there were different things on the way that certainly helped and certainly made a difference. On the other side of that, I wrote a book about my recovery story as a kind of hope to kind of inspire other people affected in a similar way. And yeah, I went on then to set up an organization called the Optimum Health Clinic, which is now one of the world's leading clinics treating chronic fatigue, ME, burnout, stress, which has patients in, I think, 35, 40 countries. And that was a whole other journey, really. And you know, I spent much of my 20s on this kind of fairly wild ride of very kind of committed, serious inner path of things like diamond approach and integral and being in psychotherapy and meditation and all these kinds of things, whilst living this very dynamic business life that had all kinds of highs and lows, and maybe we'll come into some of that later, all kinds of dramas in relationships, intimate relationships and that kind of thing. And that really just was my kind of birth, my fascination for this kind of concept of Conscious2, which I'm sure maybe we'll come to later as well, about really the collision of the inner and the outer, and what it means to wake up and kind of live our kind of deeper self whilst living that in the world, and all of the noise and all the challenges and all the complexity that really goes with that.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, when we see you, you don't really have any impression of chronic fatigue or something. So you are more
out there.
How do you say, a source of energy spreading out. And what I see, what you are doing, all the things you are adding to your Conscious2, and then you have the clinic and whatever, you must have exceptional energies. So how did it come at the end? How was the journey? I mean, you studied all this, but how was then the transition into healing?
Well, you know, the whole healing path was an incredibly complex and kind of nuanced kind of journey, let's say. And there, you know, certainly things like dealing with some childhood kind of issues and trauma, learning to calm down my nervous system, working on a kind of more functional medicine, nutritional level, that there were many kind of elements to that. And, you know, one of the things that I think is very important to remember is that everyone is biochemically different. And we tend to live in a society where we get very caught up in this idea that there's one treatment or one kind of magical answer that we're looking for, that is the answer for everyone. And that goes back to germ theory and the kind of whole traditional medical model. Something like chronic fatigue ME is actually a great example of the beauty and the complexity of the human body. And there are really as many different versions of chronic fatigue ME as there are people that are affected by it. But, you know, it was at the time, of course, it was hell. And looking back on it, it was also a magical journey. And that period of transitioning from illness to kind of health and well-being was literally like a rebirth. I mean, and having through the clinic worked with, the organization, having worked with thousands of people going on that path, it's a magical thing when someone's been chronically ill for many, many years and they're able to then function in the world. And, these days, certainly, I have a pretty intense life. And I guess in some ways, when you struggle for that many years, you realize how precious life is. And, one thing that I really learned through that was that I didn't want to live life by halves. I wanted to do all the things I wanted to do, and I wanted to live as rich life as possible.
This is wonderful. And do you want to say something? Let me first, because I'm so...
Go.
And now I've forgotten. Now it's you.
But I didn't have anything to say. Well, anyway, no. What interests me is these conditions you described, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, all seem like very mysterious things that a few years ago it seemed like there weren't any explanations for them. And normal medicine would say, throw up its hands and say, oh, this is all in your head, you know. And obviously you did not accept that kind of response. And so I just out of just sheer curiosity, what are those conditions like, and how does your insides affect those outsides, those conditions that are expressed?
And before you answer, wait a minute. I remember my question. I wanted to say...
We'll ask 2 questions at once. I'll park this question first.
I'll think up another now, okay.
No, you can. No, this is easier. You are in some way gifted because of this illness that you come to this point, what other people have in midlife and even later.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have all the life still with your energy to create something, while we begin with 50, with 60 or something, you know?
And that really pisses me off, by the way. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, now.
Okay. But my question was, that connection between, the insides, all the work interior work that you did, how did that manifest itself in changing the expression of your conditions, which I suppose haven't really disappeared, like instant cure, balm, it's just gone. It's a probably, I would imagine it's always remaining a possibility that could re-express itself within you. Am I off base?
Yeah. I mean, the path to recovery is a journey, and there are people that make full recoveries. There are people that make significant improvements, and there are cases which are incredibly complex. And I certainly wouldn't. Anyone who's worked with a number of people that I've been involved in working with the chronic fatigue and ME would never sit here and make kind of flippant statements like, because it's not an easy thing to recover from. Certainly, changing the inner definitely has an impact on the outer. But it isn't true to say that I know people that have done huge amounts of interior work and it hasn't necessarily impacted on the physical illness, because we want to put it in quadrant terms. There's a clear upper right physical piece which needs an appropriate intervention. And, even kind of integrative medicine and, some of the greatest thinkers, there's still so much that we don't know. And there's so much we know now that we didn't know a decade ago. And, it's really, I look back on some of the interventions that we were promoting when the organization started, and I slightly feel awkward and embarrassed because we've learned so much from them. And I think that's always a good sign. I think if someone looks back on their own life or their professional life a decade ago and doesn't feel a certain amount of progress and evolution from that, that's a shame in a sense. We wrote a report called Emmy, You Are No Longer a Mystery. And I think it is true to say that some of the more mysterious elements with Emmy chronic fatigue are less of a mystery now, that some of the kind of the bigger elements we do understand, at least the kind of the factors that are going on. Whether that can translate into effective treatment for every single individual, I think is not the case. But there's certainly some of the bigger parts of the mystery definitely become clearer. And one of the ways we talk about it now is it's like solving a puzzle. And you've got to have all the right puzzle pieces, and you've got to have those pieces in the right sequence in the right way. And some people's puzzle only has 3 or 4 pieces, and it's a relatively easy process. Other people have many, many more pieces. And, you know, in a sense, you can look back, and it always looks easier because you figured it out. But that journey to understanding each piece, sometimes you can battle with and struggle with something for sometimes years, and then it becomes clear. And in that moment, it's so obvious. And I think that's also true of many things in life. And of course, the danger is what a lot of people do is they focus on that moment of insight, package it and sell it to the masses, and people forget the journey and the struggle that people go on to actually get to that point.
Yeah.
This is very good that you do this reminder, because it is sold as easy, everything, you know, and then people believe that, and then they maybe give up if it is not so easy at the first moment.
And I think that's as true of health and healing, but it's also true of spiritual practice. I mean, one of the things that's been very interesting interviewing people on Conscious2 is really drilling down and trying to understand the nuance of what's happened when they've had moments of awakening. You know, one of the things in the Advaita or non-duality worlds, people talk a lot about that moment they woke up, and people forget about the decade of pain and suffering that went before. And that's not to be negated in my mind. That's often a big part of the shaping and the understanding and the opening, the loosening, and that's what I think really shapes us as people.
Yeah.
Well, that was our first 60 years, right?
Okay. Yeah. I would like to go into the changing of the world. I'm in circles where people want to contribute to change the world, and then often, you know, we do too much, or the wrong things or whatever, and maybe bleed out and get stressed and so on. And I think you could talk a little bit about the balance between how to nurture yourself while you do really passionately what you need to do, because of yourself, because it's your urge and not because somebody told you have to do that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I think what you often see is people that have, you know, if we put it in some integral language, models like stage of development or spiral dynamics, I think map it very well, that you see people that they're kind of in a religion of the external world. You know, if people are familiar with those maps, say an orange kind of worldview, and they have all kinds of sense of kind of drive and ambition, and they push themselves and they challenge themselves, and they're climbing up the slippery corporate ladder or whatever. And then at some point they realize that's not sustainable either in their body or their finances or their emotions, but on some level they reach a kind of tipping point where they can't continue like that. And so they hopefully transcend to a more green worldview, or a place where they value much more their connection to themselves, to other people, to a place of being in harmony and being in connection. And they feel like they've made progress, and they have made progress, and it feels better. The challenge is that a lot of people see that place as progress as a destination rather than another step on the ladder. And so one of my great interests in terms of the balance between someone nurturing themselves and taking care of themselves, but also really showing up in the world, is that actually both are important. And you can get people that are absolutely fixated in trying to make the world a better place and trying to drive themselves and drive everyone else, and they burn out in the process, and then they become allergic to the idea of engaging in the world. And they're much more connected, much more in balance. But the real challenge is, how can we do both? How can we take care of ourselves, our own emotions, our own needs, to be in balance, but also like there's shit in the world that requires attention, that actually requires people to show up and engage with it. And if the people which are more connected to themselves spiritually and have more of a sense of who they really are the ones that are least connected with actually showing up and dealing with the world, that's kind of a problem. You know, and it's like we look at what's happening in America right now. We see a lot of very unconscious people getting behind a very unconscious politician and having an extraordinary amount of power, at least it appears at the moment. And one of my kind of interests is, how do we get people which have moved to green or moved to a place where they understand the importance of connection and harmony and balance, to actually show up and make shit happen in the world as well, and to do that in a way which is somewhat sustainable. And certainly in kind of my life, some of the greatest potentials to grow and evolve have been when I've been the furthest away from being in a place of balance, or the furthest away from being in a place of harmony. And yes, there's a point where you can go too far and it's not sustainable and it's not healthy. But equally, you know, we're not here to spend the whole time in a place of spaciousness. We're actually here to grow. And, you know, my feeling is that we're actually the most alive when life is challenging us, you know. And it's not that we should always seek out challenge and difficulty because I must grow and I must be challenged. But I also think we shouldn't shy away. And even, you know, the diamond approach is something that I have a huge amount of respect for. I've been in for, you know, I think it's 15 years now, which is based on the work of A.H. Almas, and I think one of the most, probably the most sophisticated kind of practices of our time. But even in places like that, what you find is when people are struggling with difficult material, their tendency is always to withdraw and inquire and kind of move away from the world and closer to themselves, to explore and understand what's coming up for them. And that's of course valid and of course entirely appropriate some of the time. But how about also stepping forwards and coming into the world and being provoked and challenged and actually, yeah, showing up in life? And that's been my kind of interest, in a sense, certainly for the last 6-7 years. That's really been my thing, of how to try to integrate those two things. And it's definitely not easy. And to answer the question, it's a big part of it is maintaining the practices that support and take care of us and being kind of diligent and disciplined about that. And also realizing that the things that most challenge us can be their own form of practice. You know, it's one thing in meditation to get to a certain amount of spaciousness and quietness, and sometimes of course that's easier than others, but it's one thing to be able to find that place. It's another thing to be able to maintain that place when you've got screaming children, or you're sleep deprived, or you're in a highly challenging business situation, and you know you've got it all coming at you, and to try and still find the space within that. It feels like it's the next level of opportunity, really, to grow and to wake up.
Well, you're saying so many things that I can relate to, and especially, you know, the practice of living with this woman, you know, it just brings out everything that just makes me want to, oh my God, do I have to, you know, I want to retreat into the spaciousness inside me, where none of this has to happen, you know. But of course,
challenging him quite a bit.
That's where some of the best stuff happens, right?
Yeah.
With her, you know.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Good.
Relationship as a practice. It's one of our themes. Actually.
I don't allow him to go in retirement. That's for sure. Grow. You know, we began late. I began a little earlier than him. I began with 40 to enter into these questions slowly with psychotherapy and stuff. And he maybe 10 years ago, or when he entered into integral thought. So we have to. We don't have an eternal life, so we have to go on.
She called me out of my, you know, pension plantation in Florida into real life once again.
I wanted to say a thing which I noticed, especially as we hear a little bit about integral people. We have so much more insights. We have also developed Emotional intelligence, not so really, but a little bit more than others. And we are the, let's say, the least ones who present themselves outside and take over leadership. I mean, some do, but I think almost everybody who has come into this stage of development is called to take over leadership in one way or other. I mean, you're doing this with your clinic, with your wonderful Conscious2 series and courses, yeah. And we are trying to do it with this, you know, and maybe other stuff will coming and develop. But I sometimes think, and there comes a comment from Aline. She says, Marianne Williamson attempted to run for Congress to instill those spiritual ideas in the political area. I think it should happen so much more, that the people who really have the competencies, in the integrated competencies, not only in one piece of the cake, that they get encouraged on step up. So what is your idea? How can we collaborate to get out to inspire courage? Or I don't know what to say.
Well, Marianne.
Yeah, I think part of it is, you know, people need to feel their own path, and we will have different things that we can contribute in different ways that we can serve. But I think part of what happens within the spiritual community is it's like we can get overly attached to having enough, you know, it's like we go from this place of being completely overwhelmed by the world to this place where we start to find connection, we find intimacy with ourselves, with other people. But then that becomes, of course, very precious to us. But if you look, you know, it's very interesting how the tendency we can have to bash, you know, politicians and, you know, people which are out kind of doing things in the world. Even Donald Trump, dare I say, one thing you can't accuse Donald Trump of is not having a work ethic and not having a drive and a determination to make things happen. And if we want to go out in the world and we want to be able to stand up for things we believe, and we want to be able to challenge positions and places that we feel are not good for the world and for society, we have to match that determination and that work ethic and that commitment. And I think that is that's a challenging thing for people to do. And, you know, I thought it was awesome when Marianne stood for Congress. I think we absolutely need more people doing that. And it's like, politics is a pretty grubby place, you know, and what part of what's very interesting at the moment is, I think most of us would agree, someone like Bernie Sanders represents a value system that is significantly evolved from what else is on offer at the moment. The question is, though, is he going to get elected because potentially he's too far from the mass level of consciousness? And so then you get into questions of compromise. And, you know, I think most of us would say, well, how can you compromise on these kind of things? And then from another perspective, you go, but we want to see things change, we want to see things happen. And you start to get to these incredibly difficult questions, and questions that really don't have easy answers. You know, and I just look at that in my own small way, in my own business life, that, you know, things are very easy in our head when we're kind of full of dreaming and ambition and wonderful things we want to do. And lots of people have lots of wonderful ideas they want to do. But then when the rubber meets the road and the actual reality of what it takes to actually make things happen in the world and make things happen on a significant scale, it's often much grittier, it's often much stickier, and it's often much more unpleasant in certain ways. And we think it doesn't mean we have to compromise our integrity, but we have to. Yeah, it's just that reality is tough. It's really tough, and it's one thing people to be inspired, and of course we want people to be inspired, but it's another thing for people to have the capacity to be with and work through those challenges they face.
Absolutely. I'm thinking about, I have signed a petition or a letter to the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, no? Where people say they admire her for what she is doing, and that she is getting so much shit thrown against her that it's not everybody is thinking like that. Just to, you know, it's so easy when you're in a public position that you get all sorts of projections are thrown on you, and the positive feedbacks are so few. I'm wondering, I don't think I would be resilient enough in such a position. I think I would. So
Yep.
Isn't it that we need to build more resilience, more emotional strength, let's say, to be able to step out?
I think that's right. And I don't see it having it all clear in my own mind, but the question that comes to my mind is, how do we actually build resilience? Because it's like, on one hand, I'm a huge advocate of the value of things like psychotherapy and spiritual practice, and having been, a pretty hardcore student of all of those things for many, many years. And it's like, I look at what's built emotional resilience in me, for example, and yes, it's true, the inner practices I've done have built emotional resilience, but actually being in the world and being challenged again and again and again, and showing up to that and finding ways to engage with that, that's probably been the greater source of gaining strength. It's almost like, do you gain strength kind of thinking about lifting a weight, or do you gain strength actually lifting the weight? And it's like, it's interesting just looking at Conscious2 right now, because we're going through a very significant growth curve. We've just raised a funding round, and we're currently working on another funding round, and it's an incredibly intense environment, and it's very exciting, but it's also a very intense environment. And I compare lessons that took me many years and great difficulty to learn in my previous business, how much easier it is a second time round. And what I realized, it's like everything in life. The more you get it wrong, and the more you get the pain of the learning, and you engage with it, and you try and understand it, and you try and do it better, the more times you do that, actually, that's how you really learn. And what I see is a lot of people, and including friends of mine in the kind of spiritual communities, that I think overemphasize the importance of the inner as an excuse to not really show up to the outer. They think they're going to get more resilient by having more therapy or doing more meditation, and they're actually hiding there rather than getting in the world and taking the punches and taking the hits and actually using that as the place to grow.
Sure.
Thank you. I'm so grateful that you name it so clearly, because I think I have the tendency too. I hid here in Italy in the countryside for 5 or 6 years and didn't go out at all, just did agriculture and stuff, because I couldn't emotionally stand the life. So I had to sort of protect me time ago. It's 25 years ago or something like this. But I so to understand how we try to avoid instead of go through, and that it takes, I think it takes community. It takes people like you saying that and offering ways to be in community, to be exchange with other people, to see their experience and see that it's not anything wrong with you because you don't know it, but you have a possibility to go on.
Yeah, and that's what I really appreciate about Conscious2, because all the contributors, are working on the very same issues, and they've all come out in some way and are presenting it and are sharing it with the world and making a difference in the world. And so they're lovely examples. And we all benefit from it. And of course, we hope that in our own way, we're doing some of the same thing too. And I'm sorry, but you're foreign born, so you can't do what Marianne Williamson did and run for president. You can't do that.
It's very funny. I know I've never said this publicly before, but when I exited my first business, I am still involved and I still sit on the board, but I was kind of thinking about what I was going to do next. And for a very small window of time, partly influenced by watching many episodes of The West Wing, I said to my wife, I think I'm going to go into politics in the UK. And my wife had previously been a private secretary of a couple of high-profile UK politicians. And she looked at me and she was just like, there is no way you would be happy being a politician. She knows how much I hate cocktail parties and yeah, anyways, it's funny. we all have our true talents, and as much as there may be things we like the idea of, often the reality is quite different.
Yes,
absolutely.
Right.
I'm a daughter of a local politician, and I never could relate to that. And for me, politics would be the last thing. But I still think I want to get out and to overcome this shyness. This. I don't have it anymore. Actually, I was a classical singer before and did things on the stage. But on the stage is different because you recite something which is not really you. But when you have to go out and there's now Ulrike and says, "Hi guys, thank you for the open conversation. I very much support the perspective that doing conscious business is a spiritual path."
Yeah.
So by going out and really saying what is mine, this is a completely different thing because you are sort of naked in the public,
Mm-hmm.
But we have to do that. I think I call everybody to do that, to learn to be on camera, to go out and do, even if nobody listens. But it's a way to contribute.
Yeah.
For me.
It's a way to come out.
It's a way to come out.
I mean, one can be extremely creative, but if it stays inside one without an audience, if it doesn't go anywhere, it's...
Yeah, that's right. And yet the audience, if something is, it's funny, when Conscious2 started, it's our web developers who built the first version of the website. We're currently doing a massive rebuild and upgrading them, but really, really great guys. I really love that. Power Up Productions, I'll give them a plug. And they, I had a conversation with them recently, and I think when they first built the site, they build quite a lot of websites in the kind of spiritual kind of world. And I think they thought, oh, here we go again, another one of these people that wants to kind of do this kind of, kind of stuff, kind of conscious media kind of stuff. And then they said, the thing that they got them so pumped about Conscious2 was that the amount of people that were actually watching the content and how much traction it was getting. And it made me realize when I kind of look back on it, that it wasn't that we just put out a video and then it went viral. It was like we were posting every single day and then twice a day, and created a huge amount of content before we got initial traction. And it's people sometimes say to me, God, I'd love to do what you do. You get to go and interview and hang out with these amazing spiritual teachers. And yeah, the 1 or 2 hours that I'm on camera, I actually quite like being on camera. But the 1 or 2 hours on camera, it's like, that's the fun bit. It's the other countless hours that go into the preparation of the technical stuff and the business side and the kind of raising money and kind of accounts and it's just, there's so much other stuff that goes on.
We have learned that.
Yeah, it's like, a few weeks ago, I was in Berlin interviewing Thomas Hubel, and I was really, he's a great teacher. I was really excited to be doing that. And, we spent a couple of hours filming, but that whole 2 hours of filming was a 2-day trip, and including getting back at kind of 1 o'clock in the morning, another chunk of time in post-production, although I don't do the post-production, kind of supervising that and checking it and just the amount of stuff that goes into that window of greatness, and that's the reality. Yep.
Oh, and our reality right now is screwing all of our activities into an Italian legal financial system. That's very interesting.
Anyway, we know about that, and we want to go on anyway, and we hope at this point that you viewers support us a little bit by buying the replays. And Mark spends a lot of time, and me too, with the blabs to create timestamps so that you can find where we talked about what. And you have it here. Bit.ly, Wisdom Factory. I mean, you have subscribed here for the program, so you will see it anyway. And please buy the replays for $29 only, and you will have at least 24 videos with all the help where to find what.
Yep. And I think, Heidi, you were saying before that in the replays you do like a whole singing and dancing thing, right? As well, people get.
Oh, yes, he does.
Well, I do what?
You do singing and dancing in the replay.
I could think about that
too. Well, you do the singing, I'll do the dancing.
Oh, yeah, okay. Good. We'll do that.
Right. So,
Oh gosh. So I still would like to talk about your Conscious2 thing, because we got to know you not directly in Budapest at the Integral conference, but I know you were there, but we knew afterwards you were there because you did all the wonderful interviews with people we saw on the stage, and we knew from before, like Jeff Storsman, like Elizabeth Daybold, Perry Patton, and I don't know who else. It was quite a bit of Marilyn Hamilton, several people, and we enjoyed to watch that. And this was all for free. And you give such a lot of stuff for free, and then you ask very little money for a monthly membership. And so I mean, buy ours too, please, watch us, but go.
I think we should tell people to get into Conscious2 now while it's cheap, because it's going to get more expensive. That's
I think we should get an affiliate here. Making all this.
That's what I tell our investors. The valuation keeps going up, so if you want to invest, now's the time.
Yeah, no, it's really, you get so huge content, and we often sit in the evening, we don't go in cinemas or we don't have television, but we watch what is offered there. And it is not only spirituality, it's a whole range of things which are really, really interesting. And I wonder, how will that go on? Will you open it more to the right quadrants, or what is going on there?
Actually, thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it, and it's gratifying to hear, because that's of course why we do it. In terms of the intention, we are currently building. So we're developing in a few different directions. The first is that we're building Apple TV, iPhone, iPad apps. We're also rebuilding the whole website. So a lot of the functionality and a lot of the way that it all works will just be much smoother and much easier. We're also doing a rebranding and redesigning process. It won't look, I mean, it looks very different, but it's still ultimately very much the same kind of essence. So the whole way people experience Conscious2 will be a lot smoother than it is at the moment. And what we really want to have is that same seamless experience you have with things like Netflix, that you can watch something on your computer and then you can go and load it on your iPhone or your iPad, and it remembers what you've been watching and where you've got to, and then you go and watch on Apple TV, and then it remembers there, and then it recommends things that you might like. So the whole technology behind it is being significantly developed at the moment. And most of that will roll out in May, June time. So we're kind of right in the kind of deep, dark kind of hole of kind of development with that side at the moment. And then on the content side of what we do, we've just filmed a whole bunch of content in the States, which we're starting to gradually release. Things that I know that are coming up in the next few months. We've got extended interviews. So some of these are between 2 and 4 hours long, and also some of the courses, but things with Roger Walsh. There's a really great interview with him that we filmed at his home in California. Thomas Hubel, that interview is, I think, one of the best we've done. I'm super excited about that coming out. Saeed Dalabani, who is integral economist, who's also speaking at the next Integral European Conference. That was a great interview. When I say great, I mean, I think they were great. Sorry?
Yeah, he was with us 3 or 4 times, Saeed Dalabani and Elsa Malouf.
Yeah, he's great. I really liked what he had to say. And who else? Samuel Bonda of Waking Down. We did a nearly 4-hour extended interview called Let's Talk Sex, and we got pretty down and pretty dirty in that. I really enjoyed shooting that. And we've got a 3-month course of Sandra Maitri on the Enneagram, which starts in about a month. We've got a 6-month program with Stuart Davis called Something from Nothing on birthing your creative project, which starts in a few weeks. So we've got a lot of new content, and part of what we're also on the content side doing is gradually expanding from the more, what I would call the more sincere spiritual teachings, perhaps the things that we might be more kind of interested in, to also having more entry-level content as well. So Conscious2 becomes a platform that anybody that has an appetite or an interest in how to be more conscious or more awake in their life would find content there they would be interested in. So there's a big broadening as well in terms of the content that we offer.
Well, you know, you're moving forward here with such ambition and vigor, and evidently the funding to do it, which is wonderful. You know, I looking forward. Where are we going? What's after Conscious2 for you? Where are you going?
I don't dare think what's after Conscious2. I just try to think how I survive the next 5 years building Conscious2. You know, in a sense, for Conscious2, what we basically want to build is like a Netflix experience for someone's inner life. So, you know, we're talking about in time, I think we're currently at about 300 hours of content, and we certainly intend to get that in the multiple thousand hours of content. We also want to move into, which we're starting to do, to film some more documentary and some more entertainment-based content as well. Because right now it's very much courses, workshops, interviews, and we'd like to have some content which is a bit more, people a bit more passive in the way that they consume it, because right now it's, your brain's got to be engaged most of the time with Conscious2 content. So we want to try and have a bit more variety in that side.
Yeah. So how is the relationship with yourself when you work so much? How do you self-care now?
You know, it's interesting. I'm pretty good at knowing what my limits are. So I mean, right now in this chapter of my life is incredibly intense, and there's definitely no two ways about that. And you know, I'm like a kid in a sweetie shop who is literally doing the thing they most want to do. And in the last kind of 4 or 5 years of my previous business, I kind of knew that I wanted to do something in this space, but I wasn't clear what it was. And when I started Conscious2, it was basically an expensive hobby. I didn't have big commercial ambitions. I was more just wanting to do the interviews and see what happened with that. And then after a while, I realized that, that there was a potential there, and I had an interest to do more with it. But one of the things about the relationship with myself is that I've had periods of my life, like the years that I was ill, that I had a great deal of time with myself. And I had other periods where I worked extremely intensely, other periods where I've gone on many retreats and had time out. And so I'm very conscious of different chapters of our life look and feel different. And I think the trick is to be in alignment with the chapter that you're in. And I'm in my mid-30s. I'm married with 2 kids. And even if I wasn't driving my business life, I'm just at that chapter of life where it's intense. And, you know, I make sure I take care of myself by taking care of my body. So taking care of what I eat and making sure that even if I don't have time to go and do a yoga class or have time to go to the gym, that I make sure I walk. And a couple of times a week, I work from home in the morning. And there's a beautiful woods in London where I live, and I walk around the woods and I make phone calls, but I walk while I'm kind of doing it. I do yoga on Conscious2. I use our yoga classes, and I find that really helpful. My wife and I on a Sunday night do a Conscious2 yoga class together at home. And, you know, I love it. I love what I'm doing. And there's a certain fuel and a certain energy that comes from that. And I've had times in my work life that I wasn't as intense as I am right now, but I was far more stressed because it was negative stress, as opposed to the kind of energy that comes from building something, which is just is its own source of fuel in a sense.
So that's really great. And I only can say, you know, that it makes me very jealous that you have learned this about yourself at your age. You know, we pioneers with the arrows in our backs, you know, it took us much longer to figure out how to do what we'd like to do. It just seemed like the world was set, you know, with so many obstacles that even getting to know yourself was very difficult, let alone doing something that you really loved. And so, not that I'm saying you're growing on the backs of giants. I'm not one of those or anything, but these are generational changes that are happening also. And it's just wonderful to see, because I can't really imagine the kind of world that you and then your children will create. Wow.
I think it's also something that just kind of pops into my mind as well, has been the importance of really good mentoring and people that kind of have supported my kind of path as well. That I've, right since I was in my kind of late teens, I've invested a lot of kind of time, and also I suppose I've also invested quite a lot of money in those relationships, and be that coach or therapist, or I have a very close relationship with the financial director of my first company and a gentleman that's the chairman of both of my companies, that have acted like kind of mentors and guides in different ways as well. And I think that your point about standing on the shoulders of giants, I think, is also very true. And I think there are certain gifts that my generation have. And I look at some of the things that we take for granted that were hard fought in previous generations. And I think that's true for every generation looking back, and I think there's a certain obligation to therefore show up in life. It's like, I look at, things like, well, in fact, paths like the diamond approach actually is a very good example. That when that was emerging, and the generation now, which are many of the teachers of that group, when they found that path, there were very few options, and people often had to give up their whole life and travel to another part of the world to be part of a spiritual school. And it was a kind of all or nothing. You couldn't live your life in the country you were in and also be committed to your practice, because there weren't cheap flights. There wasn't the internet. There wasn't the kind of, there weren't the freedoms that make that possible. And there also wasn't the development and the integration of psychological practices with spiritual practice. A lot of the early collisions of that stuff was pretty messy in different ways. That caused much time. It took a lot of time people to work out and move through that. And so I think, perhaps it's being a little bit strong in my language here, but it's a kind of disrespectful for my generation to just sit and hang out in the stuff that previous generations have battled to clarify and battled to bring forward, without trying to add to that and trying to progress it in our way. And there's a certain responsibility that I think we have to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
This
yeah.
is great. So I have the inclination, we are almost at the end of our time, to sort of end this show in gratefulness. Gratefulness for what is possible in the world, for what is possible for us, what you have demonstrated in your own life. I'm grateful that that the internet has liberated me from my aloneness, that I really can connect now with people who I don't have to tell all the time what I am about, and they have ears and eyes like, what is that, So we can now find our tribe, which before was not possible, and that I can live still this moment of time. And I think you too.
Yeah, absolutely. I was in Florida, in a retirement community, and there wasn't anybody there that I could talk to about this. They were too busy being retired. and so, all of this is possible because of the technological breakthroughs of the very, very recent past.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And, this is excuse the crudeness of the analogy that I'm going to use. But one of the things that I think is often true is when people first get on a spiritual path, it's a little bit like when teenagers first discover masturbation. It's something that you tend to do in secret, and it's something that you tend to never tell anybody about. And that's very isolating. And hopefully on our kind of sexual development, we find someone else to do it with. And when it comes to our spiritual development, hopefully we find a community. But that's so much easier with the internet, that if we've got that appetite, we can go on YouTube, or we can find something like what you guys are doing, or someone can find something like Conscious2, and they can actually connect with and meet other people that are battling with the same questions and the same struggles in their life. And that's an incredible gift. It's an incredible gift for us all. And it's an incredible gift for, people that have an entrepreneurial tendency, or a tendency like what you guys have, of wanting to share their voice with the world. That actually becomes possible. And I think it's very easy for us to get fixated in the things that are not the way we'd like them to be. And, you know, we can get very caught up in, you know, it's like one of the things that I tickle myself with is when my wife and I go away with the kids, and, you know, I'm fortunate that because of the internet, I can be away from the office and I can still be engaged. Therefore, I can have time to go away. And my darling wife in summer last year booked a cottage in the depths of Norfolk in the English countryside and didn't realize they didn't have an internet connection. And I found this out, like, kind of like busted on the spot. And of course, it also had no mobile phone signal, and I couldn't get any data on my phone. And so, you know, there I was driving around trying to hack into kind of internet signals in car parks and stuff, and kind of cursing, going, oh my God. But actually, what an unbelievable gift that most of the time we have this thing called the internet, or we're on our phone and we lose the signal, we curse the mobile phone provider and forget that we have this little device through which we have access to the entire planet's information. That for a moment we haven't got a signal, it's not actually the end of the world. The amazing gifts that we have to take for granted.
Maybe it's a good reminder that's not the end of the world when we stay some days without internet and not get too much addicted to it. So it's also a reminder that we need a life without internet too. So
this morning I got up.
I'm sorry.
That's right. This morning I got up without checking email.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. All right.
Yeah.
It's like one of Conscious2's kind of most successful programs is a series called Technology and Awakening with A.H. Harmos and Karen Johnson from the Twin Diamond approach. And part of what we were talking about was going on an information diet and not accessing technology. And I was sat there as we were kind of filming it, and I was just like, I don't have many addictions, but this is definitely an addiction. And it's a great gift that we have. And as you say, Mark, it's also something that, you know, it's important as well to use in moderation.
Yeah.
So, Alex, we have to wrap up now.
Yeah.
I thank you. We thank you very, very, very much. And I'm glad that I contacted you some time ago and that we entered into contact. And this was a wonderful contribution. And I hope that our viewers see that things are possible, which they never would think are possible.
Yeah.
By your example.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So,
that's very sweet. Thank you for inviting me, and also Heidi, thank you for the tutorial that you gave me on Google Hangouts a while ago. It definitely helped improve some bits that we were doing. And you know, it's funny. It's nice to it's nice to kind of have these conversations. As I say, I did many interviews in my previous life around chronic fatigue ME, and it's nice to have this kind of just spontaneous conversation and see what comes out. So thank you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Oh, so I appreciate real interviews, let's say, structured interviews. But I think our immediate thing is more
banter back and forth. Yeah. If we could just do this with coffee or beer, you know, then we have a whole another dimension.
Okay. We will have it afterwards in the blab. Please, viewers, come over to the blab. I have posted the link, and you can jump into the video and we can talk together. Okay. And thank you again, Alex. It was great.
It's great, Alex.
Thank you.
Wonderful time. Thank you.